is Spirituality and Persona of Peacebuilding. And it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce a good friend, Dr. Trudy Conway of Mount St. Mary's University in Maryland. Please welcome her.
Thank you, Jenna. I join Jenna in welcoming you to the second day of the International Symposium on the Hizmet movement and peacebuilding. As Jenna told you, I'm Trudy Conway, and unlike many of you, I have the good fortune of not suffering from jet lag. I'm very grateful for that. I'm a professor of philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University, which is in nearby Maryland, so I have a short travel home. I've taught for 3 decades at Mount St. Mary's University, and prior to that, I taught at Pahlavi University in Iran during the quite interesting period of before, during, and after the Iranian Revolution. I was one of the few Americans who stayed on the faculty, and I was grateful to do that. As a dual citizen of Iran and the United States, it has been very painful to see the total breakdown of dialogue over the last 3 decades between these two countries. As many commentators yesterday emphasized the importance and the power of face-to-face interactions and I-thou relationships, I thought often during the talks of the great hope that filled us when President Obama picked up the phone and finally began a conversation after 35 years with President Rouhani. Inshallah, this will continue. These two leaders will have the wisdom to move beyond this first small step towards peace building. Most of my own scholarly work focuses on the philosophical explorations of the conditions which both enable and also problematize dialogue and mutual understanding. So you can see why I'm drawn to the Rumi Forum. Listening to yesterday's speakers confirmed for me the impression that I've formed that on its most fundamental level, what the Hizmet movement is a faith-inspired movement, grounded in cultivating, practicing, and also witnessing a host of intellectual and moral virtues dedicated to human solidarity, human development, and in the end, human flourishing. What attracts people like me to the movement is the power of the witnessing of these virtues in its members. Witnessing these people inspires us. They also motivate us in our personal lives. And this is, I think, extremely important in an age that is often characterized by great cynicism, especially among our youth, the students that I teach. Today's panel is a very interesting panel. I was glad to read their biographies. They model very well what I just mentioned, the practicing of both the intellectual and the moral virtues that are at the heart of the Hizmet movement. They are all scholars. They conduct research advancing our collective wisdom and knowledge, and for that we are grateful. But they are also socially engaged practitioners. They theorize, as many academics do, but what is impressive is they also do the hard work in the trenches. They work to promote human well-being and development. It's an interesting panel this morning, and I'm going to introduce them now. Our Dr. Simon Robinson has worked as a psychiatric social worker. He's also an Anglican priest, and after 2004, he became a professor of applied and professional ethics at Leeds Metropolitan University. Dr. Nazila Iskandarova, and I was very pleased that I got her name correct on the first try, is a scholar of Islamic spiritual care and counseling who has done worldwide works of many dimensions, stemming from her studies of Islamic thought as it bears upon pastoral counseling, spiritual care in the healthcare area, and in multi-faith context. Soraya Chechek travels all the way from Melbourne, so I'm sure you are still suffering from jet lag. Australia, where she is completing her PhD, following a career as a secondary school teacher. Her research focuses on social movements, social conflict, and their effects on social cohesion and resilience. The panel is entitled Spirituality and Persona of Peacebuilding, and they will each speak for 20 minutes, and then we will open the floor to discussion. Please join me in welcoming our first panelist, Dr. Robinson, and he will be speaking on the spirituality of peacebuilding, Fethullah Gulen and Jean-Paul Lederach. Thank you.
Thank you. 20 minutes. I only thought we had 15 minutes. 20 minutes. I'll have to work on this. Yes, thank you. I want to begin, please, by saying how moved I was last night by Sophia's eulogy to tea and tea drinking. And this has caused me so much emotional response that I have to come out in public from the closet and declare that I am a member of the Great British Tea Party. It does exist, sort of, yeah. And we aim to stand for election in 2 years' time, and the key element of our program will be that at 4 o'clock every day, everybody stops for tea. But of course, tea, that's fascinating. What does tea have to do with peace? Well, actually, tea has a lot to do with peace. If you go back it's almost a year now, we had quite a problem in terms of the perception of Muslims, and the English Defence League was at its height at that point, EDL. Now, the mostly guys, in fact, yes, mostly guys, mostly with IQs lesser than my 2-year-old grandson. And he's quite bright, of course, but and they were determined to find some kind of conflict with people in the local mosques. And they're in Hull, actual story, true story, in Hull. The English Defence League early one morning had surrounded the local mosque. And they were there with the bolts in the side of their heads, sort of jumping up and down, and they were determined to find some conflict. And just around them were the journalists who were waiting to write about the conflict and communicating in a very clear and truthful way. And then, in the middle of all this, everybody waiting for the conflict, and a small man emerged from the mosque bearing a cup of tea and invited the English Defence League to come into the mosque and share a cup of tea and a biscuit. And unbelievably, they all did. Oh, all right, I'll have a cup of tea. Great. And in they went. Extraordinary moment. The tea had suddenly transcended everything. Wow. There could be a paper here about tea, but my paper isn't about tea. Though, going back to Sophia's talk last night, there is no doubt that her point was it's the small things that build up peace. It's the small things that build the bridges between people. I suppose that incident leads me to think about two questions. The first question is, when is somebody going to tell the US Tea Party that tea is for drinking and for talking over, not for throwing into the River George? Okay. And the second question that I have is, when that small man emerged from the mosque with his cup of tea, was that serendipitous? Did he discover this as a means of peacemaking on the hoof? Serendipity? We'll come back to that shortly. Or was it planned? By the amount of tea that our Turkish brothers and sisters drink, I guess from a Turkish perspective it's planned. But in a way, this forms the heart of the paper. I won't read it in detail, I'll just try and give you some of the highlights. Medium lights anyway. It looks at Fethullah Gulen and Jean-Paul Lederach, two eminent peacemakers. Jean-Paul Lederach, intentionally so. He goes out to make peace. It's part of his job. He's an academic, but he also goes out and works in areas of conflict. Fethullah Gulen, who is quite different. For him, peacemaking is part of the core of what it is to be human and what it is to relate. He doesn't go out intentionally as a peacemaker, but peace is the product of his exhortations. Fethullah Gulen, on the one hand, is very planned, well organized. John Paul Lederach, on the other hand, is very much a guy who is risky. He takes risks. He goes everywhere. He goes on the journey. And he finds out about the ways in which we can build bridges by serendipity. Serendipity is a great thing. It was coined by Horace Walpole in 1754, and he said, "I've just come across this new word that I've coined, serendipity, based upon the old story of the three princes of Serendip, who would wander on their travels and would discover things they hardly realized they were going to discover by virtue of good fortune and sagacity, their wisdom. They were able to make the connections as they went." And that's really Lederach's approach. So in this paper, I've been trying to show how they differ slightly, but actually how they complement each other, because they're both focusing on that building of the bridges. They're focusing on what Lederach calls the development of the moral imagination, creativity, consciousness of your social and physical environment, consciousness of the network, or as Lederach refers to this, the web of humanity, of which we are a part. And in this, now I've got an extra 5 minutes, I can say that I'll do three things. The first thing is I'll briefly say more about those differences. The second thing is I'll focus in on one aspect of peace building in practice from the Hizmet movement, and in particular journalism and the media, and how this has been worked through in Zaman Daily and the practices there. And thirdly, I'll raise a question, which is one that's been on the back of my mind throughout the conference so far, which is something about the leadership of Gulen. What kind of leader is he? What are the marks of a leader who is a peacemaker? And I'll raise that question via a particular case, which is to do with the Gaza flotilla and the interesting discussions that emerged after the shall we call it a crisis? Okay. How are we doing for time? Yeah.
I'll give you a signal.
Oh, good. Excellent. Yeah. 2 minutes to go. Give me a minute. I suggested in the paper that actually Gulen is not an optimist. The word optimism is often used of Gulen, but I'm sure he's not an optimist. Optimism is a generalized notion that things will be okay. Yeah, that's okay. It'll work out okay. No, Gulen is a man of hope, and hope is a much more precise notion. It's a precise notion that the positive psychologists have worked on, as well as the theologians and philosophers. Snyder particularly argues that hope is made up of three things. It's made up of agency, knowing what you're doing. I understand who I am, I understand what I'm doing. Agency, freedom in that sense. Secondly, goals. But these are significant goals, not just any old goal. I was looking at the posters in the Washington Marathon registration yesterday, and they were exhorting that everybody had to have courage and honor and determination and commitment. But the goal is to get to the end of 26 miles, which is okay, but it's not the ultimate moral goal that we're talking about. And we need to have a significant goal to give us a sense of hope. And finally, pathways, says Snyder. We need to see that there are ways forward. And the important thing about pathways is that pathways can only be developed through dialogue. As we dialogue, we see all the different possibilities. As we dialogue, we move into all kinds of relationships of responsibility where we become accountable to each other and to our society. We've heard a lot so far about the plural identity that is there in Gulen's thinking. And with that plural identity comes plural responsibilities that we have to keep working at to form pathways through. And clearly, Gulen, within his activities, as we've heard many times up to this point, provides each of those aspects of hope. He focuses on agency, on knowing what you're doing, on thinking, on critical thinking. He focuses on, as I say, clear moral goals and clear moral virtues. And the pathways, of course, we can see the ways forward, the ways in which people work together, the businessmen work together to fund the schools themselves focusing on those clear moral goals. So very planned, very worked out, very worked through. I'd want to add to Snyder's and others' work that actually the other point about hope is that it's not just future referent, it's also present referent. It's about the sense of whether I am hopeful or hopeless. I can well recall as a 12-year-old child as the blackboard eraser swung by my left ear silently, and my mathematics teacher said, "Robinson, you are hopeless." You are hopeless. Yeah, it's something about who you are. You have no hope. So the other element of hope, I think, in all this peace building, it comes right back to the notions of tolerance, toleration. We could have a long discussion, you and I, about toleration and compassion and what they're about. But it's that recognition of humanity in the other. Switch to Lederach, and Lederach just slightly different, because Lederach talks about disciplined pessimism. Disciplined pessimism? How far can you get with disciplined pessimism? Well, he's talking about systematic questioning. He's talking about being realistic. It's there in different ways in Gulen too. But he's also talking about checking every aspect of our armoury, as it were. Not just the practice, but also the values and the principles. Have we really thought about our principles? Have we really thought about how they are worked through? How's the time going? 10 more? Yeah. I've got to cut to the case of the media, Zaman Daily. And they have worked through some critical principles, which you might say give hope to journalists. And of course, here we are in the great centre of journalism here today. It's wonderful, and wonderful to see all the dialogue which they create. The key thing about the Zaman Daily is that they have, like all good corporations, and there are good corporations. Like all good corporations, they have brought together their own code of ethics, but they also have a clear 5 principles, which Kerim Belgi, when I met him in Istanbul, very kindly shared with me. 5 clear principles. Good news is also good news. 2, no sensationalism. 3, no denigration and no defamation. 4, text intensivity. Pardon? Text, we'll come back to that. And 5, being in equal closeness to all the political parties. We can't go through those in detail now, but the point about all of these is that they do begin to enable responsible dialogue. And they make dialogue something you have to work at, because they use very precise terms. They even use, as Kerim said, high Turkish. You've got to work at this. You've got to work at your vocabulary. You've got to work at listening to each other and knowing what you mean. It's hard work to dialogue. It's not just about the affective side, it's about the intellectual side, as we've heard. And therefore, those principles in practice, in terms of a man, are quite extraordinary. They have been exemplified in the way that Zaman ensures that all different perspectives are worked through in the paper. Dialogue is exemplified in the paper. They make sure that they have people who are not of their persuasion who are writing articles. So we can hear different perspectives. And of course, for Lederach, that's key. It's only in difference that we learn. It's only when we begin to feel a little uncomfortable that we realize that there's something problematic about our own values and our own perception of our values and perhaps our own perception of ourselves. So what I'm going to put a little flag in there. Dialogue is not just about being nice. It is about being prepared to be uncomfortable. And good dialogue, I suggest to you, will make us feel uncomfortable. Without that, there will be no learning. Dissonance. How long? 3 minutes to go. Good. So, the final issue. How much dialogue goes on within? This is partially a challenge, and it may seem rather naughty, but please do get back to me and say it's naughty if it is naughty. When the flotilla tried to break the blockade, the Israeli blockade, there was a disastrous consequence. People lost their lives, and in the end, the blockade wasn't broken. But many people, many Turks, many Muslims were behind this flotilla. This was showing shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. It was clear, was it not, that this is one of the basic principles that they were fulfilling. And then along comes Gulen and says, no, this is not what we're about, and suggests a different way. And argues very cogently that there were other ways to do this and that the consequences had not been worked through. All of this suggests that maybe dialogue is not just about finding the same universal values and saying, that's nice, we all like those ideas, because he shared universal values with all the Muslims who were there shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. The real dialogue is about how we translate those values into practice, into action, the Hizmet. And that has to be and will be uncomfortable. I can recall Kerim saying the morning that he went in to Zaman Daily and they'd heard that Gulen had stood out against that, there was shock throughout the organisation. And that is, well, I want to say that's great, because at that point, everybody began to talk. And Kerim talked with Fethullah Gulen and others, and maybe we've got to agree to differ. But without that issue of difference and without that working through those details, I want to argue that peace building is not going to succeed. How are we doing for time? 1 minute? Gosh. Oh, yeah, okay. The heart of that, then, I think we can see that Gulen, very well planned, very well worked through. Lederach, much more risky, much more open to change and difference and the potential for conflict. It would be nice to see the two of those in greater dialogue. How can those be handled? And how, ultimately, does the movement itself handle conflict? And are there good examples within the movement of how the conflict, when you share the same principles, is actually handled? That'll do. Thank you.
And now we have Dr. Nazila Iskandarova, and she will be talking on the concept Ihsan Kamel in Gulen's The Emerald Hills of the Heart, Gulen's Horizon as a Remedy for Peaceful Coexistence.
So good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for Rumi Forum to bring us all together here. And I agree with Dr. Simon Robinson that dialogue is not only about being nice to each other, but it is more than that, like sharing concerns, listening our problems, and offering solutions all together. So it is beyond asking questions, what's your name, how you are? Little bit about my methodology. Some people call me feminist because of my feminist idea of empowering women and making them being easy with themselves and with their identity, even if they are in headscarf, in traditional Islamic clothing. So I would call myself a believing woman. I borrow Asma Barlas, a Pakistani-American scholar, political science professor. Asma Barlas calls herself a believing woman, and she borrows this word from the Quran. What is my methodology? Again, I borrow from Asma Barlas. She has 3 principles of critical thinking, critical approach to the Quran, and the classical source of Islam. One is Tawhid principle, which means the divine unity, and which means that no one can claim to represent God. Even men cannot claim that position. The second principle is justice principle. And in the Quran, God calls himself Rahman ar-Rahim, which means the most compassionate and most merciful. And that implies that God is just and God cannot do harm to anyone, including women. Especially when we apply to that important principle to the Quranic verse from Surah Nisa, chapter 4, and verse number 34, which is briefly called Nushuz verse, or the disobedience verse, which implies, like, according to traditional Islamic tafsir or hermeneutics or interpretation of the Quran, which says that beat women who are disobedient. But Quran, they fail to see that sometimes men can be disobedient too. So what to do with men if they are disobedient to their wives? So that's my approach. And the third principle is unrepresentation, which means that God cannot be represented by anyone, including men and women. If men claim that they can represent God, that is against the principle of the Surah Ikhlas, which says that God cannot be represented. So that is my approach to the Quran, and I use these hermeneutical principles to find out what Fethullah Gulen says in his book, especially Kalbin Zümrüt Tepeleri, the Emerald Hills of the Heart. I apply İnsan-ı Kamil, again, the Sufi concept of a perfect man and universal man, to understand Gulen's concept of aksiyon insanı, the man of action or woman of action. So a little bit about the definition of the concept of İnsan-ı Kamil. Sufism had a great impact on Gulen's views. Without understanding Sufism, no one is able to understand Gulen. No one is able to understand what motivated Gulen to inspire so millions of people around the world. Sufism had a great impact on Gulen's view from childhood. Again, a proper understanding of İnsan-ı Kamil, the concept of a perfect man and universal man, we are not able to understand, again, Gulen's concept of the man of action. Aksiyon insanı in Turkish. So what does it mean, a perfect man? In Turkish and in Persian, it is İnsan-ı Kamil, but in Arabic, it's al-insan al-kamil, which means a complete human, a universal man, the person who has reached complete perfection, or in other words, who has lost himself or herself in God. And Sufis called it fana fillah. In Islamic concept, Insani Kamil is strongly related to the beginning of Muhammadan mysticism in the 8th century. I have a little note here. When I say in Muhammadan mysticism, sometimes people accept this as a derogatory name because people think that it refers to worship to Muhammad, but it is not actually. Muhammadan mysticism started in the 8th century, and it is about love, about the love to Prophet Muhammad. And some Sufis had so profound and deep love to Prophet Muhammad that they argued that the title, Insani Kamil, a universal man, a perfect man, only applies to the Prophet Muhammad. No one can claim to be Insani Kamil besides Prophet Muhammad. But later on, even some Sufis, they invented some hadith you could see, Ana Ahmad bila mim, which means that I'm Ahmad, which is Prophet's name in the Quran, without letter mim, and that applies to Ahad, Abwan. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Jalaladdin Rumi, in certain century in Anatolia, he also had a profound, deep love to Prophet Muhammad. And for instance, I'll quote from him. He says that the whole world will become lost in him, which implies to Prophet Muhammad. And he also said that, know that Muhammad is a guide. Until a man first comes to Muhammad, he cannot reach us. He also said that everything that exists, honor and humility, authority and high degree, all are of his dispensation and his shadow. For all have become manifest from him, from Muhammad. Many prominent Sufis, I don't intend to cite all of them and talk all about them, but I'll quote very important names, including Muqatil ibn Sulaiman al-Balkhi, Mansur al-Hallaj, Attar, Fakhruddin Razi, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, and Abdul Karim Jili. All have also devoted many of their writings to the love for Prophet Muhammad. I'll quote especially from Hussein ibn Mansur al-Hallaj, because he's a very controversial name in Sufi literature, and in classical, traditional, mainstream Islamic Sufism, he is misunderstood. However, he also deeply influenced Fethullah Gulen. So in his work, Mansur al-Hallaj, his book's title is Kitab al-Tawasin. He deals with the idea of the primordial love of God for the Prophet Muhammad. He said that Prophet Muhammad was his light, Prophet Muhammad's light, was the first created thing, whose life precedes everything and is the first part of God's light. Mansur al-Hallaj influenced the evil Azerbaijani poet where I'm from, Nasimi. Nasimi influenced Shams Tabrizi from Tabriz, again from Azerbaijan, and his student, Jalaladdin Rumi, and he influenced Fethullah Gulen. So we need to able to identify who influenced first and who followed who. The idea of primordial love then turned into the idea of Nur Muhammad. Nur Muhammad means Muhammadan light. And it was Sahlat Tustari first who defined Nur Muhammad. And again, what it means that God created Muhammad's light first, and from his light, God created Adam. That's very important. And even they use the Quran and the Hadith to prove the ideas, because in Islamic studies, even Sufis like Faqihs, jurists, Islamic jurists, they had to prove the ideas from the Quran and from the Hadith. If you don't quote from the Quran and from the Hadith, no Muslim would listen to you. So that's very important to quote from the Quran and from the Hadith. And again, Ibn Arabi, he also had a profound love to the Prophet Muhammad, and he elaborated Nur Muhammad, Muhammadan light, to Haqiqa Muhammadiyah, the reality of Muhammad. What does it mean? It means that reality of Muhammad is a manifestation of divine names and divine attributes. So God's attributes and names are reflected, manifested in Prophet Muhammad. And his student, Jili, we talked about him, he first used the word Al-Insan al-Kamil, and he wrote a book about Al-Insan al-Kamil, and he put three steps. He recommended 3 steps to become a perfect man. One is Bada'a, the beginning of acquiring divine attributes. And the second step is Tawasud, man as a perfect being, becoming both human and divine. And the third is attaining power to influence the natural world and beyond. So all these ideas definitely influenced Gulen's concept of insani kamil and his idea of action insanam. Little bit, do we have time? 3 minutes, okay. I have to briefly talk about woman as insani kamil, because my own, so I cited 3 hermeneutical principles to apply to read the Quran, to read the Hadith, and also Sufi literature, and read the Gulen. So my argument is that in classical Sufi understanding, Insani Kamil concept was a gender concept, which meant that women were not included in this category. Women were not included in this category. Starting with Ibn Arabi in certain century, so they started to expand the concept to women as well. But still, Ibn Arabi had very limited approach to Insani Kamil. But Said Nursi, Gulen's teacher, and Gulen himself made it more practical and expanded this genderless concept. That's why you may see why women are so active in Gulen's movement, because of this. You know that for centuries, Muslim women were excluded from interpreting the Quran or contributing to Islamic society. Only few women, including Aisha, Prophet's wife, and the other very, very few women were able to overcome the patriarchal barriers to elevate in the society. But still, we didn't have many women. The attempt of the patriarchal society to exclude women from an active role in spiritual, religious, and public life was against the Quranic instruction of God's creation of man and woman as a pair and in equal status. There are 3 fundamental issues in Islamic thought are cited as a main cause why women were excluded in patriarchal societies to contribute to the society. One is a creation story. The Quran doesn't say that woman was created from man, right? However, borrowing other Abrahamic interpretation of the creation story, it influenced Muslims as well in patriarchal society to exclude women and blame women for the fault of men. And the second is the female autonomy. So in patriarchal society, what patriarchy means the power of husband, brother, whoever, over wife, sister, and mother. So patriarchy is about the power of men. Men fear from women. That's why they wanted to exclude women from active contribution to the society. Gulen was able to overcome this traditional and classical understanding of women, the creation story. That's why he inspired women to become active. So he doesn't expect, although I even asked a few people saying that if woman wants to become a direct student of Fethullah Gulen, how it works, and they told me that Gulen himself doesn't train women directly for different reasons. Like we have to understand in everything in its context, right? Finished? Okay, so again, when I speak a very good joke, I will finish with that joke, and it is hard for me, like to understand, post-structuralism and what is that? It is the pastor. Pastor's son sees his father writing something, a sermon for the Sunday church service. And he says that, what are you writing and how you are writing? He says that I am inspired by God and I am writing my sermon. He says that, why are you deleting some of your notes then? So, sometimes we read the scripture, we delete it. So people have different ways looking at the things. So I think that Gulen has very unique approach to everything. Sometimes he's able to delete the traditional understanding of Islam and women. That's why I am proud to say that women are so active in Gulen movement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm sure we wish we had more time to hear more. It's a very interesting topic. Now we will hear from Soraya Chechek on how purposive intention modifies actions, altruism.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The paper will be examining issues surrounding altruism and the dialogical contributions of the affiliates of the Hizmet movement in Melbourne and Sydney to explore how altruism and these values, such as self-sacrifice and dedication, are utilised to cater for common good. As a moral and social value, altruism affects social interactions and attitudes towards the wider society, and directly involves collective identity and citizenship behaviour. Subsequently, the paper examines the Hizmet movement from the perspective of the social capital theory as an analytical tool to understand the activism. The social capital theory has derived from the idea that social networks have both the importance and power as civil actor in modern democratic societies to facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. Putnam defines social capital as civic embeddings or engagement which facilitates communication and creates trust, social bonds, which in turn make collective action easier and opportunism and cheating less likely. He proposes participation in voluntary civic associations, advances the socialization of individuals, and cultivates values and mores regarding communal life, such as reciprocity, trustworthiness, and friendship. The Hizmet movement's dialogical engagements in Australia, the Australian Intercultural Society, which is also known as the AIS, and Affinity Intercultural Foundation, which is known as the AIF, in Melbourne and Sydney respectively, aim to bring different sectors of society together to facilitate purposive, collective, intellectual activism and moral effort to offer a civil response to social issues collectively, seeing this a more subtle and legitimate way of influencing social policy dynamism for social well-being. In order to understand this inner dynamics, the norms such as trust, trustworthiness, cooperation, acceptance and diversity and inclusiveness will be explored, which are what the affiliates hold in common. In defining altruism, Gulen's approach is mainly formed from the perspective of Islamic teachings, the Quran and the Sunnah. Gulen reads the life of Prophet Muhammad and that he believes the finest representatives of Islam were the Prophet, then his companions, and then his descendants throughout history. Yuja summarizes these characteristics as they turned their backs on the world, served their people, refrain from causing harm, and live to help all humans and other beings, and live as trustworthy, altruistic, and devoted believers, for whom spiritual progress is measured in terms of or determined by others' happiness in this world and the hereafter. This sums up the altruistic service understanding of the Hizmet movement. These dynamics can be summarized as, first, service as the purpose of one's life. Second, altruism or living for others or sacrifice. Third, sense of personal responsibility. And fourth, spirit of devotion and dedication. Looking at the internal norms of the organizations utilizing UJA's framework are means to understand the obligation and expectations of the affiliates and how altruism turns into beneficial dynamics in light of the social capital theory. The social capital theory focuses greatly on the feelings of trust, which refers to confidence in the reliability of a person or a system, and trustworthiness, which involves honesty, accountability, fair dealings, and level of confidence. It is based on the belief that individuals or organizations will act in ways that are expected or promised and will take into account the interests of others. Putnam has defined trust, which tends to be cumulative and self-reinforcing. Grimes has noted that trusting is highly a social activity, and his study indicates that people who have trust placed in them tend to act in a trustworthy manner. In the dialogical encounters of the AIS and AIF, trust is a step in the construction of friendship and common ground. In turn, is what motivates one to reciprocal altruistic services. Since the service is based on pietistic activism, in whom one can feel confidence and trust, so much so that others can turn their backs on them without a second thought, which focuses on the truth and service to all, not just to Muslims, but to all people. In Gulen's point of reference, a believer's piety can be seen in their dealings with others, and in their concern with the well-being of others rather than their own. In other words, Gulen's assessment of piety regards the level of devotion and activism that the individual puts forward. Accordingly, those who represent Islam can get along with everyone by accepting that even the most difficult person has a positive trait. This characteristic is needed because a Muslim should be beneficial to all people, with the exception of those who unjustly are aggressive in attacking others. This is the first step to engage altruistically to develop trust and friendship in the dialogical encounters. Second is the element of trustworthiness in all affairs, in the community and society. Gulen states that our greatest capital is our credibility, reputation. This must never be lost or misused. In order to protect one's reputation, a person must be trustworthy, must believe in the value of being trustworthy, and must accept trustworthiness as a pillar for temsil or representation. In order to advance one's credibility in the eyes of the entire community, a person must serve to benefit others. Caldwell and Cox recognize that social trust enhances social capital for increased levels of interaction. As cited by the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Cox has defined trust as essential for the effective functioning of society, and absence of trust leads to increased demands of bureaucracy and rules, and an increased burden on law and order. Many theorists recognize that generalized social trust is important for effective functioning of society. Putnam states that trust lubricates social life, and a study conducted in the United States of America, Social Capital Community Benchmark Survey, recognizes the importance of social trust in lubricating social interaction and getting things accomplished. In this sense, the affiliates focus on their own inner dynamics to present trustworthy profile to facilitate trust as a lubricant in the social activity of the organizations. Third, Gulen purports a system of dialogical engagement which is peaceful in nature and arouses the activism of penetrating into the hearts of individuals spiritually rather than politically. This is needed so the individual can find common ground, trust, and find an avenue to exchange in dialogical encounters. According to Gulen, successful exchange is via representation, temsil, of altruistic services when an individual is an ethical person who can earn the trust of others with their behavior, who is obliged to have a gentle manner, compassionate nature, soft heart, and consideration and kind words for others. A believer must be one who gives without accepting a return of services. Believers are those who give with their time, money, knowledge, sacrifice their pride, position, and daily needs. It also requires the development of problem-solving projects for the benefit of the community. This understanding of altruism, which is centered on trust, lubricates the potential to spark a reciprocal relationship for mutual solidarity. Reciprocity has been seen to be closely related to trust, which assumes the individual will act in ways that are expected or promised and take into account the interest of others. Although altruistic behaviors are commonly thought of as not compliant of a return to a giver, it is possible to consider that there is an intangible return associated with such behavior. Reciprocity is related to altruism, which is seen as a social behavior and a value orientation in which individuals give primary consideration to the interest and welfare of the other individuals, groups, or the community as a whole. Black and Hughes see reciprocity as an important aspect of social capital because the norm of reciprocity may encourage the sharing of support, knowledge, and ideas between individuals, groups, and communities. In a community where reciprocity is strong, people care for each other's interests. In the way, reciprocity encourages the individual to balance their own self-interest with the good of the community. Fourth, Gulen's altruistic idealism exceeds the definition of selflessness to also include elements of sacrifice and purposive devotion. Gulen regards the altruistic nature of an individual who can utter "after you" even while exiting hell and entering paradise. Gulen does not bring measures to the level of altruism in which, according to him, a believer must have sincere intentions, give without desiring a reward, and should serve all humanity, not only of those of his or her own nation or race. Acceptance of diversity and inclusiveness, according to the social capital theory, are important in contributing to community harmony and social cohesion. Acceptance or tolerance of diversity as well as inclusiveness demonstrates an individual's or community's acceptance and respect for a broad range of social norms, lifestyles, and beliefs. This contributes to the balance of bonding, which is bonding between homogeneous groups, and bridging, which is bonding between heterogeneous group behaviors. Flora suggests that networks, communities, and groups function most cooperatively as a whole when they are diverse, flexible, and inclusive. For this to occur, a network or community needs the capacity to accept and include diversity whilst allowing the network and its members to maintain a sense of identity. Last, Gulen defines a believer to weave friendships with everyone on common ground and work to increase commonalities in a way that does not call for compromise of religion or values. Instead of stirring meaningless controversy and engaging in acts or talks related to enmity, a believer must live according to his or her values, love his or her profession, and busy themselves with building friendships and continuing service projects that promote amity. Believers should also encourage or assist others who work for the good of humanity. This is a form of sense of self-efficiency to utilize all friendships to cater for common good and peaceful coexistence. In the Australian Bureau of Statistics Social Capital Framework, sense of efficiency is related to the capacity the individuals, groups, and entire communities possess to achieve goals and the satisfaction with the degree of influence that individuals or communities believe that they have in relation to activities and outcomes in their community. The ABS observed that an individual's capacity to engage effectively with his or her own community is dependent upon his or her perception of capability or efficiency for engagement in the community. This perception also affects the health and well-being of the individual to integrate into the community. A study of the Urabella region conducted by Helen Berry of the Centre for Mental Health Research in Canberra found that integration into the community is beneficial to mental health. This study observed that the more people participate in their communities, the better their mental health. It was suggested that this was due to the participation in the community, leading to a stronger sense of belonging and feeling valued as a member of the community, which in return leads to increased trust and optimism. Individuals, communities, and groups who are empowered with a strong sense of efficiency are able to actively participate in the groups and communities to which they belong and are able to develop trust with the people they interact with. This participation also refers back into an enhanced sense of self-efficiency. Bushbaum found that engagement in civic participation was associated with a sense of community control. This confidence is associated with a strong sense of efficiency in those confident individuals, groups, or communities feel they have the capacity to provide input and have a positive effect on outcomes in relation to decisions made by societal institutions. According to the ABS Social Capital Framework, networks and corporations can facilitate teamwork, enhance efficiency and quality, as well as improve the flow of information and knowledge. ABS also cites that according to a corporation as representing an investment in individual and group identity, which can lead to the development of social networks and in the end, better economic and social outcomes. This is due to minimizing time and money spent on ensuring others uphold the end of an arrangement or applying sanctions or penalties where they do not. Therefore, the norms accompanied by the affiliates of the AIS and AIF focus on building connections between the affiliates and the sectors of society to enhance the relation and projects that catalyze the process of social policy dynamism for social well-being amongst the wider community. The AIS and AIF both are characterized as informal, no membership, decentralized, lack of hierarchical network of individuals gathered around issues such as interfaith, intercultural dialogue, living in harmony, and social interactions in a diverse cultural society. As stated in the vision statement, the aim is to remove bigotry and establish peace and harmony in Australia together with its partner organizations. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Sisak. I have a question for each of the speakers, but what has been so emphasized yesterday was the spirit of otherness. So I will open the floor to your questions. We have 15 minutes. So you raise your hand and you walk up to this mic, and I can't see if there's another mic. Just one, okay. So you have to work your way up to this mic. Questions? And for the sake of time, if you know you have another question following, you might already be starting over. Thank you.
My name is Abdur Reza Bana. You mentioned that about the influence, who influenced Rumi. I think in the Persian and literature, Sufism literature, the biggest influence on the Rumi was Attar and Sanai, because in one of his poetry, Rumi mentioned that the Attar was the soul and Sanai was the eyes. I am coming after Attar and Sanai. I think that was for your information.
I'm not an expert on Rumi, but sorry. I definitely want to emphasize on Rumi's poems of inclusiveness, you know. What I wanted to highlight is that the love for Muhammad was so deep in all Sufis that they, you know, they define how to become a person, a good Muslim, so to resemble to Muhammad, and the saying that Muhammad also, you know, manifested divine names and attributes. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I wanted to highlight that the concept of Insani Kamil in all these great Sufi masters and sheikhs, including Ibn Arabi, Tustari, and Shabustari, Sanai, Fakhruddin Razi, and Said Nursi and Fethullah Gulen. I don't call Said Nursi and Fethullah Gulen traditional classical sheikhs or peers. They are not, definitely. They don't belong to Sufi taqiyas, Sufi orders like Naqshbandi or other Sufi orders, but they definitely were inspired by Sufism. And the main idea, their approach to Sufism is that if one wants to become a perfect man, they don't need to belong to any Sufi order, or they don't need to follow any Sufi sheikh. Following the Quran and the Sunnah is very important to become a perfect man.
Oh yes, Yes, I agree with that. If you are accepting Islam and Iman,
Yes.
that you will come to understand the perfect person.
Exactly. But one point here is that my understanding of Islam is different from your understanding of Islam, because Islam is married with local cultures and traditions. So the Muslim who come from, let's say, South Asia, they do have different approach to the Quran and to Sunnah, those who come from Turkey. But what unites us all together is that our belief in divine unity, Tawhid, and taking Prophet Muhammad as an example.
Sure, absolutely, because that is the flexibility of Islam.
Exactly.
Adaptability and flexibility of Islam, because you have the American Islam, European Islam, Turkish Islam, Persian Islam, and Hindu Islam. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And there's a beauty in that, you know, if we do have the diverse attitudes to religions, even the way we live, it's good because God created us in this way.
Thank you.
Another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that theme of the perfect man. I guess from my reading, that strikes me that comes out of the doctrine of the Quran, of the verse that's usually referred to, 33:21, that the Prophet Muhammad himself is the perfect man. What is then the relationship of this discussion with in Sufism and Fethullah Gulen, and then that Islamic doctrine of Muhammad, the perfect man?
Yeah, I see everyone wants to become a perfect man, a universal man or woman. It is definitely an interesting topic, you know, and I'm very happy that we do have a lot of questions, and my presentation, you know, ignited some flame even, and an interest in the subject. The Quran defines Prophet Muhammad as a slave and as a prophet. He is a human being. You know, but the tendency of humans, like that happened in every religion, including in Judaism, Christianity, even in Buddhism. So we want to see people who we follow in the skies. We cannot imagine them walking with us on earth, you know. That is a human tendency to elevate the status of people. The Quran is very clear, and even like Shahada, testimony Muslim says is that Muhammad is Abdullah, you know, he is a slave of God. We do have a lot of criticism and opposition to the concept of Insani Kamil since its birth, since the 8th century. I'll quote from Rabia al-Adawi, a very famous Sufi woman in 8th century in Iraq, in Basra. She couldn't accept the concept of Insani Kamil, saying that it is against the principle of Tawhid, because, you know, even he says that, God, I only have love to you so much that I don't have a place in my heart, even to Prophet Muhammad. So that was her approach. And in our contemporary age, we do have certain Muslim women, scholars, including Nemat Hafiz Barzanji. She comes from Syria, but she lives in the United States. She also says that Islam is not ideology. That's why Islam doesn't need any ideal person. You know, we should accept our humanity. Humanity means that we can make mistakes, you know. We do have the tendency to make mistakes. No one is God. No one, everyone has fault. That's their approach. That's why we do have like uneasiness with the concept of al-insan al-kamil, a perfect man or universal man. But the underlying assumption of insan al-kamil, we don't have a clear reference to in the Quran or in the Hadith. But there is a clear reference in one Hadith particularly, and Gulen cites it in his book, Kalbin Zümrüt Tepeleri, especially he cites from Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, two canonical hadith texts in Islamic sciences, studies. So one Sahaba, companion of the Prophet, approached the Prophet to Aisha, Prophet's wife, and says that, describe me the Prophet's characters. And she replies that, haven't you read the Quran? So the Quran, so every Muslim should read the Quran to become a perfect man, or like even to grow towards perfectness in their life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Isgaranova, I'd like to ask you if you have been influenced by the Action Insan Fatima Mernissi, the sociologist from Mohammed V University in Morocco, particularly her work on the veil in the male elite, in which she patterns a historical overview quite similar to what you just presented to us fortunate in the audience.
I'm not familiar. Probably I'll take the name from you.
How about Professor Sijic?
I'm not familiar with it as well. It's not my area of discipline. Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, Professor Mernissi is an author of...
Oh yeah, Mernissi from Morocco.
Morocco,
okay,
yes.
I remember
Yeah.
now. I'm really sorry for that.
Yeah.
I know her.
Scheherazade goes
She is-
west and...
Yes.
And, yeah.
Yes. She defines herself as a secular, especially in a secular feminist Muslim woman, especially in 1970s and 1980s. But starting in, why I say Muslim secular feminist, because she was very critical towards even Quran and to the life of Prophet Muhammad, right? But starting in 1990s, we do have a new tendency in Islam, in feminism, among Muslim women, and that is called Islamic feminism. First, it was born in Iran with the publication of Zanan in 1992, but later on it spread to Turkey, in Egypt, and in Morocco, and other parts of Muslim world. So Islamic feminists, they claim that we do not need to get rid of our tradition, we have to be comfortable who we are, with our identity. Islamic feminists, though, are very critical of the traditional Islamic understanding. And they say that we should not apply 13th century or even 8th century Islamic understanding to our contemporary time, because their socio-historical and economic life was completely different from our life now. And even Fethullah Gulen, I would like to tell that he says that we need to read the Quran with a fresh eye, with a new perspective in every 25 years. So, which means that understanding of the Quran 25 years ago cannot be applied now. We need a fresh perspective in every 25 years. And Mernissi also says that. But I would like to tell to you who inspired. It wasn't like Fatima Mernissi. Probably Fatima Mernissi has a special place, of course, in understanding Islamic tradition. But I'd like to cite the names of Leila Ahmed. She comes from Egypt, and also Sadia Sheikh. She comes from South Africa. Nemat Hafiz Barazanji, and so many scholars again. I know the names, but I can't recall now. So these are people who really inspire Muslim women, and why they call themselves Islamic feminists, because they think that they are not only scholars, as you said. They also say that we need to be active in our economic, social, and political life to inspire people. And that's where, like, Fethullah Gulen movement or Hizmet movement is a clear example of this idea.
I don't see anyone else on the line, so I get to ask one question. I teach at a Catholic school, and women are barred from the clergy in Catholicism. And I found it shocking to find out that actually in Catholicism, women were banned from, well, not necessarily banned, but it was not the practice for them to be involved in advanced theological studies until the 1960s. So this is a society where you had a very, very strong feminist movement, but women could not enter into theological programs to get masters and PhDs in theology until the 1960s. And even if you look at the gender diversity of theology departments, you see the influence of this since that period. So I'm curious about the situation within Islam, and I think you're absolutely right. You cannot talk about it universally. It has to be localized and particularized. So perhaps you can talk about in the situation in Turkey or in other specific locales. What is the situation of women in terms of advanced theological studies? Especially in terms of what you just said, that Gulen says every 25 years we need a new set of eyes. Are they advancing with these new eyes in those studies?
You know, I'm not from Turkey, but I studied in Turkey. I was in PhD program in Marmara University in 2000. But it wasn't the patriarchal, traditional, fundamentalist Islamic Muslim society that prevented me to complete my PhD. But it was a secular Turkish government, because they banned headscarf in 2000, and even though I tried to advocate on my behalf and saying that I'm not from Turkey, I'm not a Turkish citizen, I'm from Azerbaijan, it cannot be applied to me. But they said no, Muslim girl or woman with headscarf, they can come to the university. So that's why when I analyze the situation of women in religion, I don't want to narrow myself with micro or meso elements of causes. I want like to look at the great picture, like macro picture, and that includes colonialism, patriarchy, racism, Islamophobia, and homophobia too. I would like to say homophobia, especially want to advocate, tell the problems of LGBT community here. So we need to look at a bigger picture of causes, why people prevent women to study religion, because religion and God, especially sacred texts, empowers them. God empowers women. And men in patriarchal societies, they don't want to see women in that situation. They want women to be subordinate to men all the time. That is a main reason, and we can see this tendency in every society, in every culture, in every religion.
Thank you. And very regretfully, our time is up, but we can continue our conversations over tea and coffee. Thank you.